On June 24th, 2026, the following happened. At 11:10 in the morning Eastern Time, a magnitude 5.6 earthquake struck Northern California near the small city of Ukiah in Mendocino County, strong enough to send items crashing off shelves in local businesses, powerful enough that the mayor of Willits told reporters the situation could have been worse. No major injuries. Then at 6:04 in the evening Eastern Time, the magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck northeastern Venezuela, followed 39 seconds later by the magnitude 7.5 that I covered in this series on the day it happened. Hundreds of people killed, thousands injured, buildings collapsed across Caracas and La Guaira. Minutes after the Venezuela doublet, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake struck. Offshore near Kuji in Japan's Iwate prefecture, several people injured, minor damage. And in the hours around these events, earthquakes in Chile, the Philippines, and Papua New Guinea were added to the count circulating on social media. 4 major seismic events in less than 8 hours, spanning 3 continents and 2 ocean basins. And within hours, the question was everywhere. Are these connected? Is the Earth waking up? What is happening right now? I want to give you the most honest and complete answer I can to that question, because I think it has 2 parts, and most coverage only delivered one of them. The first part is simple, and the scientists are unambiguous. The California earthquake, the Venezuela doublet, and the Japan earthquake are almost certainly not physically connected to each other. There is no global seismic chain reaction happening. The second part is more interesting and more useful. Understanding exactly why these events feel connected and understanding why they are not tells you something genuinely important about your real earthquake risk that the what is happening panic story never gets to. Let me take you through both parts. The USGS estimates that several million earthquakes occur worldwide every single year. Several million. The vast majority are too small to be felt by humans. They are detected only by seismographic networks, cataloged and filed. But the total includes, in an average year, roughly 17 earthquakes of magnitude 7.0 or higher, and 1 or 2 of magnitude 8.0 or higher. If you divide those numbers down, it means the Earth produces, on average, somewhere around 10,000 detectable earthquakes every single day, 275 every hour, 4 or 5 every minute. The planet is not in a period of unusual global seismic activity right now. The planet is doing what it always does, which is shaking constantly along thousands of active fault systems distributed across every tectonic boundary on the surface of the Earth. The reason June 24th felt different was not because more earthquakes happened. It was because more earthquakes were reported. The Venezuela doublet was devastating. I covered it here in detail, and devastating events attract attention. When a major earthquake is in the news, the standard editorial behavior of most news outlets is to add relevant nearby seismic context to the story. Are there other earthquakes happening? Yes, there are always other earthquakes happening. The California M5.6 and the Japan M6.9 were both well within the normal background frequency of seismic activity in those regions. California has dozens of magnitude 3 to 5 earthquakes every week along the San Andreas system. Japan has roughly 1,500 earthquakes per year, more seismic events per year than any other major nation on Earth. On any given day in June 2026, there was almost certainly a magnitude 5 or higher event somewhere in Japan and a moderate event somewhere along the California fault network. On June 24th, those events happened on the same day as Venezuela's doublet. On most other days, they were not in the news because there was no headline anchor to attach them to. This is a well-documented cognitive phenomenon called the availability heuristic. When a category of event is prominent in your awareness, when it is in the news, when people around you are talking about it, when it is emotionally salient, you notice more examples of it. After a major earthquake in Venezuela, you notice the earthquake in California and the earthquake in Japan that you would not have noticed the day before. The world did not produce more earthquakes on June 24th. The media produced more earthquake coverage. And because earthquake coverage makes people search for earthquakes, more people found them. Social media amplifies this cycle. Each shared post about the Japan event, each thread asking, is this connected to Venezuela? Each alert notification that a news app pushed about the California event adds another amplifying loop to the perception of an unusual cluster. That perceptual explanation is not meant to minimize the suffering in Venezuela. The doublet that killed hundreds of people is real and terrible, and I covered it at length in this series. But the California M5.6 and the Japan M6.9 were not part of that disaster. They shared a news cycle with it, not a fault system. Before I get to the specific geology, I want to add one more layer to the geography point, because it explains something important about why Ring of Fire nations always appear together in these earthquakes everywhere headlines. The Ring of Fire is a horseshoe-shaped belt of tectonic activity that encircles the Pacific Ocean, running from the tip of South America up through Central America, Mexico, the western coast of the United States, Alaska, down through Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, and back around. Approximately 90% of the world's earthquakes occur within the Ring of Fire. That means Japan, California, Chile, the Philippines, and Papua New Guinea all share this seismic zone simply by virtue of bordering the Pacific Ocean. On any given day, the probability that at least one of those nations experiences a noticeable earthquake is not low. It is close to certain. When you then add Venezuela, which sits on the Caribbean plate boundary, a completely separate seismic system, to a day that the Ring of Fire is already producing headlines, the visual impression of global seismic activation is powerful and almost entirely misleading. The headlines are showing you the Earth's normal activity, not something abnormal. Here is the specific geological reason the June 24th events cannot be physically connected. The California earthquake occurred on the Macama Fault, a right lateral strike-slip fault that is part of the broader San Andreas system in Northern California. The movement is horizontal, two slabs of crust grinding sideways past each other along a fault that runs through the California coast ranges. The Venezuela doublet occurred on the fault systems at the boundary between the Caribbean plate and the South American plate, a completely separate tectonic system thousands of miles away, involving a different plate boundary geometry, different fault mechanisms, and different driving forces in the deep mantle. The Japan M6.9 occurred offshore Iwate Prefecture on the Japan Trench subduction zone, where the Pacific plate slides beneath northeastern Japan. The same subduction zone that produced the devastating magnitude 9.0 Tohoku earthquake in 2011. That is a third completely separate tectonic system on a third plate boundary involving a third combination of geological forces. The distances between these epicenters span thousands of miles. According to the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology, those distances are far beyond the range where seismic waves from one event could physically destabilize another fault. Stress transfer from one earthquake to another, and the mechanism by which one rupture genuinely increases the probability of another, operates at scales that are locally meaningful, not globally meaningful. When the Venezuela M7.2 ruptured its fault segment, it transferred stress to nearby fault segments in the Venezuelan Andes and coastal range, contributing to the M7.5 main shock 39 seconds later, as I covered in detail. That is stress transfer. That is a genuine physical mechanism connecting two events. The M5.6 in Mendocino County is roughly 3,700 miles from Caracas. USGS geodesist William Barnhart was direct about the June 24th events. What happened in California and Japan was almost certainly coincidental. And Russian geophysicist Pyotr Shabalin, director of earthquake prediction theory at the Russian Academy of Sciences, said there was no pattern connecting Venezuela and Japan, and that the two events were pure coincidence. There is one mechanism that can, in some cases, produce genuine earthquake triggering at surprisingly large distances, and I want to address it directly because it is real and it deserves accurate explanation rather than dismissal. Dynamic stress triggering occurs when the seismic waves from a large earthquake travel outward and, as they pass through distant regions, provide a small additional stress perturbation to faults that are already loaded near their failure threshold. The key word is small. The stress addition from seismic waves at distances of hundreds to thousands of miles is a tiny fraction of the stress a fault accumulates over years and decades of tectonic loading. In most cases, even if a distant seismic wave passes through a fault that is near failure, the wave is not sufficient to push it over the edge. The fault was going to rupture soon anyway. The wave might, in a statistical sense, advance that rupture by days or weeks. Whether that happens for any specific earthquake at any specific distance is almost impossible to confirm, because we cannot know whether a given earthquake would have happened within the next hour or the next century without the wave's influence. After the 2011 Tohoku M9.0, the fourth largest earthquake ever recorded, scientists looked very carefully for evidence of remote dynamic triggering. They found some evidence of triggered microseismicity, very small events in geothermal and volcanic regions worldwide, where the seismic waves from Tohoku may have nudged already pressurized systems into minor release. They did not find compelling evidence that any of the major earthquakes that occurred in subsequent months, in Turkey, in New Zealand, in Italy, were triggered by Tohoku. The planet's faults were loaded and releasing on their own schedules, as they always are. The appearance of a connection between Tohoku and subsequent global seismicity was the same perceptual artifact that made June 24th, 2026, look like a global seismic event. A large, emotionally memorable earthquake made subsequent unrelated earthquakes visible. I want to use one more historical comparison because I think it clarifies the difference between a genuine earthquake cluster and a perceived one. In the winter of 1811 and 1812, the central United States experienced something that actually was a genuine physically connected earthquake cluster. In December 1811, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake struck near New Madrid, Missouri, in the middle of the North American continent, far from any plate boundary. driven by an ancient failed rift zone buried deep in the crust. In January 1812, another magnitude 7.0 followed on the same system. In February 1812, a third major earthquake struck, estimated at 7.7, the largest of the sequence. 3 earthquakes of magnitude 7.0 or higher in 3 months, all on the same fault zone, all causally related through stress transfer within the same tectonic structure. That is a genuine cluster. The shaking was felt from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic coast. The Mississippi River reportedly ran backward for several hours. These events were genuinely connected because they were on the same fault system, in the same tectonic setting, feeding each other through measurable stress transfer at distances of tens to hundreds of miles. The June 24th global events were not that. They were the California fault system, the Caribbean-South American plate boundary, and the Japan trench subduction zone. 3 separate tectonic systems on 3 separate continents with 3 separate geological histories, all operating simultaneously on their own internal schedules, as they have been doing without interruption for millions of years. The New Madrid comparison is useful precisely because it shows what a genuine cluster actually looks like in the data. The same zone, the same fault structure, the same driving stress, cascading through linked segments in rapid succession. The June 24th events have none of those characteristics. The faults involved have no physical connection to each other. The tectonic stress driving California's San Andreas system is the Pacific North American plate boundary. The stress driving Venezuela's doublet was the Caribbean-South American collision. The stress driving Japan's Japan Trench event is the Pacific Plate's subduction beneath Eurasia. These are independent engines running independently. The fact that they all ran on the same Tuesday is not a seismic signal. It is a calendar coincidence. The coincidence of a single day is statistically ordinary when the planet produces 10,000 earthquakes a day. What was not ordinary was the Venezuela doublet's severity and the human catastrophe it produced. That story deserved the attention it received. The global seismic event story that got attached to it did not. And here is why the distinction matters. The answer to what is happening right now, the true answer, is that the Earth's tectonic plates are moving exactly as they always move, loading stresses on exactly the faults they always load, and releasing those stresses on schedules that human civilization has been too brief to fully characterize. California is not at elevated seismic risk today because Venezuela had an earthquake 2 weeks ago. Japan's fault systems are not more dangerous this week because California had an M5.6 on June 24th. The risk in each region is what it always was, driven by the local tectonic setting, the local fault geometry, the local history of seismicity, and the local building stock and preparedness infrastructure. The global cluster story redirects attention away from that local, specific, actionable risk toward a vague global alarm that has no practical meaning for the person watching it. If you live in California, your seismic risk is the San Andreas, the Hayward, the Cascadia subduction zone off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, and the dozens of secondary faults that run through the urban corridors of Los Angeles and the Bay Area. That risk is real, ongoing, and not influenced by Venezuela. The Hayward Fault in particular, which runs directly through the densely developed East Bay cities of Oakland, Berkeley, Hayward, and Fremont, is one of the faults the USGS ranks as most likely to produce the next major Bay Area earthquake, with a significant probability of a magnitude 6.7 or larger in the next 3 decades. The Cascadia subduction zone, the offshore fault that runs from Northern California through Oregon and Washington, is capable of producing earthquakes in the magnitude 8 to 9 range, events that would dwarf the June 24th events in energy and in impact on the Pacific Northwest. The last full Cascadia rupture was in January 1700. The recurrence interval for full margin ruptures is roughly 200 to 500 years. The Shake Alert early warning system now covers California, Oregon, and Washington, and it can give you seconds to tens of seconds of warning before shaking arrives. Enough time to drop, cover, and hold on, to move away from windows, to stop a vehicle safely. Know how to receive Shake Alert alerts on your phone. Know that the warning time depends on your distance from the epicenter and may be very short for a local event. And know the specific advice that the seismic expert in the ABC7 coverage of the June 24th California event repeated plainly: do not run to a doorway, do not run outside. Drop, cover, and hold on. That instruction is 30 years of earthquake engineering research condensed into 4 words. If you live in Japan, the J-Alert system provides nationwide earthquake early warning. Japan has the most sophisticated earthquake monitoring and warning infrastructure in the world, built through decades of experience with some of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. The June 24th and M6.9 near Kuji was handled exactly as Japan's system is designed to handle it. Warning issued, population responded, injuries minor, infrastructure intact. That outcome is not luck. It is the product of building codes, early warning systems, and cultural familiarity with earthquake response that has been built and refined over generations. If you live in Venezuela, the weeks since June 24th have not been recovery. They have been the beginning of recovery from a disaster that a prior video in this series described fully. The fault system that produced the doublet, the Caribbean-South American plate boundary, continues to generate aftershocks, and Funvesis continues to monitor it. The risk that the current aftershock sequence poses to already damaged structures is real. Every structure in the affected areas that survived the doublet should be inspected by a structural engineer before being occupied for the long term. There is one final point worth making about the timing of this video's title, because the framing, earthquakes all over the planet, is itself doing something worth examining. That framing implies an unusual global state, a condition of elevated planetary seismic activity that is different from the norm. The norm, as I have described it, is several million earthquakes per year, 10,000 per day, ongoing and unceasing. Earthquakes all over the planet is not a news event. It is the permanent condition of the planet's crust. What is genuinely unusual and genuinely newsworthy is when one of those earthquakes strikes a heavily populated area, damages critical infrastructure, or kills large numbers of people. Venezuela's doublet did all three. The California M5.6 and the Japan M6.9 did none of those things. The editorial decision to cover all three as parts of a connected phenomenon gave the Venezuela disaster the additional context of global seismic significance that it does not technically possess, at the cost of obscuring the specific local risk stories that the California and Japan events could have told on their own. The question this video's title asks, what is happening right now, has a precise answer. What is happening right now is exactly what the Earth does every day. The faults are loaded. They release. Most of the time, the release is too small to feel. Occasionally, it is large enough to matter. On June 24th, one of those large releases happened to coincide with other ordinary releases in California and Japan. The coincidence made for dramatic headlines. It did not make for a connected global event. And the most useful thing I can tell you from all of that is not to watch for the next global cluster. There will always be one in the headlines eventually, because the Earth never stops shaking. The most useful thing is to know your local fault, know your local warning system, and know what to do in the specific seconds when the shaking starts where you are. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.